The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
Teflon Pan Man. I'm the Teflon Pan Man. Ain't nothing gonna stick on me.
Hello everyone, this is Robert Rosenthal coming to you from New York on the 13th day of June 2018. You are listening to All You Can Eat. And I will tell you that although the podcast is generally about deliciousness, and my aim is to kind of inform and entertain, and if we get lucky, even inspire. Try to infuse it with a little bit of humor around the subject of food, eating, dining, cooking, all that kind of thing. Today's episode is specifically different in that I want to talk about exclusively Anthony Bourdain, because his death, which was a shock to everybody, continues in some way to linger on my mind, and I was a fan. I mean, in a big way. If you're into travel, which I am, and you're into food, which I am, Anthony Bourdain was the man. And so tonight's podcast is dedicated specifically and exclusively to Anthony. And I'll even play a couple of clips from some things that he has said before that are public. I will remind you of some of the great quotes that he has delivered in his time here on Earth. I will even interview a couple of people who knew Anthony and who knew his best friend Eric Repair. And I would also like to read to you some of the many articles that have been written in the short time since his death this past weekend. So that's tonight's podcast. Let's just start with some of the basic details. You know who Tony Bourdain was. He was born in 1956 in New York City. He grew up in Leonia, which is a suburb here in New Jersey. Dad was a French guy who was a music industry executive, and his mom, Gloria, was a staff editor for the New York Times. Tony went to the Dwight Englewood School in Jersey, which is a co-ed college prep school. And he enrolled at Vassar, but dropped out due essentially to having had, to drug use. He had a heroin problem. He eventually ended up at the Culinary Institute of America. He graduated in 1978, and from there he went on to run a number of restaurant kitchens in New York City, including most notably where he became executive chef at the Brasserie Les Halles. And I remember it well. And I remember going there and enjoying it because I, at around that time, was in a cooking school myself, studying French technique. So going to Les Halles was perfect because it was very much the kind of food that I was being taught how to cook. And it was a really cool place with a lovely vibe. And the first thing you noticed when you came in to Les Halles was like the counter. It's like a butcher, refrigerated counter that you would see kind of in a butcher's shop. And they were literally selling, steaks and meats and all that kind of stuff up front. And then you would proceed into the restaurant where the food was classically kind of French brasserie food. Beautiful salad, Dijon vinaigrette, all the classics of French cuisine. But you were basically there for steak free. That is why you went to Les Halles. And it was fun and delicious and good. Tony was the chef. When my wife told me that he was dead, I actually didn't believe it, because she said he he killed himself, and I thought, no, my first instinct literally was to go April Fool's, but then I'm like, no, first of all, that's a sick joke, and second of all, it was nowhere near April. And I thought, my next instinct was, because there's no way this guy would kill himself. I mean, he was on top of his game. He had a kid, a child, a daughter that he loved. He had a girlfriend. He had a best friend. He was in the middle of taping an episode for a show. I thought, okay, I know. He must have faked his death. I literally was not accepting of the fact that he had died and the way that he died. I mean, if he were going to kill himself, no, maybe it was an accident. Maybe he relapsed and scored some bad heroin. No, maybe it was something else. You know what? The only explanation I could think of, because I rejected the idea that there was mental illness, the only idea I could think of was that he must have discovered he had some kind of horrible, terminal, debilitating cancer and said, you know what, I'm not going to go that way. I will take my own life. But as it turns out, and even though we don't have the toxicology reports, he had a problem. Obviously, a desperate problem, and the only way to end it was to take his own life, which he did in a hotel room in a small town in Alsace, France, by hanging himself with his own bathrobe, that the belt on the bathrobe. Tony was a pretty great writer, and when he was at Les Halles, he penned an article about what was happening in restaurant kitchens behind the scenes that people really didn't know about. He tried to get it published at first in the Free Press in New York, and literally went out every single week after he had submitted the article to see if it had been published, and it hadn't. And some combination of things led him to actually submit it to the New Yorker. And shockingly, I think mostly shockingly to him, it was accepted as an article by the New Yorker. And it's the article that really started it all for him. April 19th, 1999, headlined, "Don't Eat Before Reading This. A New York Chef Spills Some Trade Secrets," by Anthony Bourdain. And it starts like this: "Monday's fish has been around since Friday, under God knows what conditions. Good food, good eating is all about blood and organs, cruelty and decay," is how he begins. "It's about sodium-loaded pork fat, stinky triple cream cheeses, the tender thymus glands and distended livers of young animals. It's about danger, risking the dark, bacterial forces of beef, chicken, cheese, and shellfish. Your first 207 well-fleed oysters may transport you to a state of rapture, but your 208th may send you to bed with the sweats, chills, and vomits." Tony wrote that article, and man, it exploded. He exploded. It was from there that he was offered a book deal, Kitchen Confidential. A book that nobody had ever seen or heard anything like this before, where he revealed everything going on behind the kitchen, behind the scenes. And it was from there that he started getting the television jobs. First at the Food Network, then a Cook's Tour, then over at the Travel Channel, where he did no reservations, and then ultimately over the last 5 years or so, on CNN with Parts Unknown. And I don't think, I talk about myself as being a fan, I don't think I missed one episode of anything that Tony ever put out. And I don't think I ever missed any article that was either written by him or about him ever since. Let me read you something from the obituary in the New York Times written by Pete Wells, who said, "When kitchens are being wrapped in a shimmering gauze of glamour, Mr. Bourdain got busy unwrapping them, revealing the injuries and addictions, low wages and high tempers that took a toll on workers. Among other things, he was one of the first writers to tell the dining public that many high-profile New York restaurants would cease to function without the work and talents of Mexican employees. It was almost a casual aside, yet it suddenly opened new subjects to the purview of food writing, immigration policy, labor conditions, racism. He identified with the grunts, portraying himself as a slinger of cheap steaks and French fries. The grunts, in turn, identified with him, not because of his contributions as a chef, but because he told the world what the work was really like. And once he left kitchens behind for a career in travel television, he didn't lead his camera crews on a tour of the world's most luxurious resorts. He went to Detroit and the Bronx, Libya, and Beirut. And there was this from The Observer, written somewhat anonymously by film crit Hulk, who said about Tony, he was a titan, a poet, and a potty mouth. He had the acerbic wit of an Oscar Wilde protagonist and the bacchanalian instincts of a death metal roadie. He was well read. He had a handshake that could waffle from limp to stern depending on his energy level. He made you feel included in whatever conversation was going on. He was exactly how you would imagine him in person. He facilitated conversation better than anyone on the planet, whether there were cameras running or not. He was so good with words it inspired jealousy, and yet so dedicated to his work it inspired the same effort. He worked tirelessly to let his devotion and respect for his subject shine through. He was an eternal student, hungry to absorb the essence of that which was placed before him, not so that he may simply consume it, but so that he could translate its essence back unto us. He was as at home in a palace as he was in a cabin or a tiny third world village. He loved the world just as much as he loved America, yet he always expected better of America and argued passionately for it to be so, which only helped forge him as an icon of Americana itself. This next one is from David Simon. If you are not familiar, David is the really brilliant creator, producer, head writer, and showrunner for all 5 seasons of the HBO television series The Wire, who discovered Bourdain in watching like a weekend worth of No Reservations on television and decided he needed to do anything to become Bourdain's friend. And he eventually meets up with Bourdain so that he can buddy up with him, but gets Bourdain in by having him write for Simon's television series Treme, which took place in and around New Orleans. And David writes about Tony, he was precise when he told Barack Obama that he wished more Americans had passports. And indeed, it was hard to argue against the idea that the portion of our republic that hasn't ventured abroad is the dead weight now dragging us into national mediocrity, insisting that all points of the compass save ours lack basic liberties or don't exalt human values or don't eat, drink, cure the sick, prescribe violence, or educate fools with greater efficacy than we do in this fading realm. They won't go there. They won't dare. Yet they already know how exceptional America is and how miserable and frightening the rest of the world must surely be. Go, move, see, feel, eat, grow. The Church of Bourdain was founded not merely on the ever more vulnerable national credo that all Americans are created equal, but on the much more ambitious insistence that this declaration might be applied wherever you wandered and with whomever you cooked or shared a meal. He remains, for many of us, the American that we wish ourselves to be in the world's sight. To have him widely displayed as our countryman, open to and caring about the rest of the world, and being so amid our current political degradation, this was ever more important and heroic. To lose him now, amid so many fear-mongering, xenophobic tantrums by those engaged in our misrule, is hideous and grievous. But make no mistake, it wasn't love of food that led Bourdain to the embrace of a shared human experience, of a world merely hiding its great commonalities behind vast and obvious culinary variations. It was the other way around. Tony was intensely political, a man always aware of those at the margins or those who seem never to be reached by wealth or status or recognition. That's from David Simon. I asked legendary restaurateur Danny Meyer for his thoughts on Bourdain's passing, and he told me this interesting story about the way in which Bourdain actually inspired him. Did you have a chance to ever spend any kind of time with him?
Not a dramatic amount of time. I think that, there's there's many, many people who did. There are a multitude more of people who never met him once and yet felt like they knew him.
Yeah.
And then I fall into a middle category, which is having met him several times and yet never really knowing him. I think it would be... I actually had a complicated relationship at the beginning that happily turned around in the last 5 years or so. But, the first couple times I got to meet him, he was the chef at Leal, and I loved it.
Right.
It was great. And sometime in the mid-1990s or so, it's probably maybe even the late 1990s. It was definitely before he wrote Kitchen Confidential. This was before social media, but it got back to me through several sources that he was just furious with me for eliminating smoking at our restaurants. And, what an awful thing to do, and how dare you, and all this kind of stuff. And I never confronted him on it because he never said it to my face, but it kept coming back to me. And then he came to 11 Madison Park for dinner one night, which was not at all far from Leal, and he could not have been more cordial.
Right.
He still didn't say anything to me about it, and I still didn't say anything to him about it.
Right.
And then he wrote Kitchen Confidential. And I said to someone, for me, he was like a stone against which I was able to sharpen my own knife.
Right.
That book, I would say, did more to provoke me to write Setting the Table than anything else, because it was in a weird way an extension for me of the how dare you prevent people from smoking. And it was kind of a sense of, this is how our industry is. And he was such an amazing writer and such an amazing communicator that it was completely plausible for anyone who read the book to say, well, that's how the industry is.
Right.
And that had not been my experience, and I really wanted to tell the other side of the story. So I never ever said this to him, but there's no question that motivated me. That did more to motivate me to write Setting the Table than almost anything.
Part of what made it, well, there was so many things that made it sad, but I know that Tony had an 11-year-old daughter, Ariane, and he left her behind. Here's what he said. Here are some quotes from Tony himself. He said, "Fatherhood has been an enormous relief, as I'm now genetically, instinctually compelled to care more about someone other than myself. I like being a father. No, I love being a father, everything about it." He said that from the second I saw my daughter's head corkscrewing out of the womb, I began making some major changes in my life. I was no longer the star of my own movie, or any movie. From that point on, it was all about the girl. I became a father at 50 years of age. That's late, I know, but for me it was just right. At no point previously had I been old enough, settled enough, or mature enough for this. The biggest and most important of jobs, the love and care of another human being. He also said this, "I also do feel I have things to live for. There have been times, honestly, in my life that I figured, I've had a good run. Why not just do this stupid thing, this selfish thing, jump off a cliff into water of indeterminate depth? Before my daughter, I would go to places where I was frankly asking for trouble. It was a daredevil move. In retrospect, I don't know that I would do that today, now that I'm a dad or reasonably happy." Words from Tony. Bourdain had also had, I think you could say that he had a relationship with Asia Argento, Italian actress who had accused Harvey Weinstein of rape, and Tony was very outspoken about that. After Batali, for example, was accused of sexual assault, Bourdain wrote that one must pick a side. I stand unhesitatingly and unwaveringly with the women. He was very outspoken that, about Harvey Weinstein. He started dating Asia in 2016 when they were shooting an episode in Rome for Parts Unknown. And it was clear from watching him on camera that he was smitten with her. And what's not as clear is whether or not their relationship was in that same condition by the time that he had taken his own life. In fact, there was a picture of Asia from just a little while ago, where she was seen holding hands with a French reporter, and I don't know. People went bananas online, and some stupid attempt to place some blame on her or on that. Rose McGowan, the actress, came to her defense, but he clearly had some type of affair going on with Asia. In fact, as he himself said, life is complicated. It's filled with nuance. It's unsatisfying. If I believe in anything, it's doubt. Bourdain was also basically best friends with Eric Ripert, the esteemed, really one of the greatest chefs, if not in America, in the entire world. And it was always funny to see them together on television. It struck me that, Bourdain was like the demon to Ripert's angel. Like, Ripert is this kind of very calm Buddhist, practicing Buddhist. And then Tony would do everything that he could to torture him. Took him to the Sichuan province to just eat one hot pepper after another until Bourdain said, "We're going to wait and see his hair go on fire." Anyway, I spoke to award-winning New York Times best-selling author Veronica Chambers about Bourdain. She actually wrote recently the book 32 Yokes, which is his life story, and I asked her about Eric. Here's what she said.
He's an extraordinary human being. I mean, I literally feel that's not just a book that I'm proud to have written. It's like a person who I'm privileged to have spent time with.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he is someone who has thought so deeply about life and connection and what we're here for. And I mean, writing that book changed my life.
Wow. I just love this 20-second clip from when Tony appeared on Bill Maher's show on HBO. Listen to this one.
Because it's the most primal thing, eating, or maybe sex is. What is, like, if you had to choose between a great meal and mediocre sex, what would you choose?
Well, that's really it calls for a qualitative answer. I mean, depends who's cooking and who's fucking,
Part of what made it, well, there was so many things that made it sad, but I know that Tony had an 11-year-old daughter, Ariane, and he left her behind. Here's what he said. Here are some quotes from Tony himself. He said, "Fatherhood has been an enormous relief, as I'm now genetically, instinctually compelled to care more about someone other than myself. I like being a father. No, I love being a father. Everything about it." He said that from the second I saw my daughter's head corkscrewing out of the womb, I began making some major changes in my life. I was no longer the star of my own movie, or any movie. From that point on, it was all about the girl. I became a father at 50 years of age. That's late, I know, but for me it was just right. At no point previously had I been old enough, settled enough, or mature enough for this. The biggest and most important of jobs, the love and care of another human being. He also said this, "I also do feel I have things to live for. There have been times, honestly, in my life that I figured, I've had a good run. Why not just do this stupid thing, this selfish thing, jump off a cliff into water of indeterminate depth? Before my daughter, I would go to places where I was frankly asking for trouble. It was a daredevil move. In retrospect, I don't know that I would do that today, now that I'm a dad or reasonably happy." Words from Tony. Bourdain had also had I think you could say that he had a relationship with Asia Argento, Italian actress who had accused Harvey Weinstein of rape, and Tony was very outspoken about that. After Batali, for example, was accused of sexual assault, Bourdain wrote that one must pick a side. I stand unhesitatingly and unwaveringly with the women. He was very outspoken about that, about Harvey Weinstein. He started dating Asia in 2016 when they were shooting an episode in Rome for Parts Unknown. And it was clear from watching him on camera that he was smitten with her. And what's not as clear is whether or not their relationship was in that same condition by the time that he had taken his own life. In fact, there was a picture of Asia from just a little while ago, where she was seen holding hands with a French reporter, and I don't know. People went bananas online, and some stupid attempt to place some blame on her or on that. Rose McGowan, the actress, came to her defense, but he clearly had some type of affair going on with Asia. In fact, as he himself said, life is complicated. It's filled with nuance. It's unsatisfying. If I believe in anything, it's doubt. Bourdain was also basically best friends with Eric Ripert, the esteemed, really one of the greatest chefs, if not in America, in the entire world. And it was always funny to see them together on television. It struck me that, Bourdain was like the demon to Ripert's angel. Like, Ripert is this kind of very calm Buddhist, practicing Buddhist. And then Tony would do everything that he could to torture him. Took him to the Sichuan province to just eat one hot pepper after another until Bourdain said, we're going to wait and see his hair go on fire. Anyway, I spoke to award-winning New York Times best-selling author Veronica Chambers about Bourdain. She actually wrote recently the book 32 Yokes, which is his life story, and I asked her about Eric. Here's what she said.
He's an extraordinary human being. I mean, I literally feel that's not just a book that I'm proud to have written. It's like a person who I'm privileged to have spent time with.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he is someone who has thought so deeply about life and connection and what we're here for. And I mean, writing that book changed my life.
Wow. I just love this 20-second clip from when Tony appeared on Bill Maher's show on HBO. Listen to this one.
Because it's the most primal thing, eating, or maybe sex is. What is, like, if you had to choose between a great meal and mediocre sex, what would you choose?
Well, that's really it calls for a qualitative answer. I mean, depends who's cooking and who's fucking.
Tony always had a great love for Vietnam. You got to hear him talk about the love affair that he has with that country.
As with a love affair, you don't really realize you've fallen in love until it's too late. So it's after the fact. I mean, I'm sure, I fell in love with Vietnam on one trip, and I think it was only on a return trip that I realized that I was a goner. So I went first time to South Vietnam, made very good friends, immediately recognized this incredibly beautiful country filled with proud cooks and passionate eaters, a place that looked and felt just like the movies, which is of course what I very much wanted, yet better. A place that still evoked Graham Greene's Quiet American, still all those years later. But it was when I went back a second time with my crew, Chris and Lydia, we all went back, and I'll never forget, we got off the plane, just walked out of the airport to get in the car. As we're heading into Hanoi, we all burst into tears. I mean, we're all weeping. It was just so visceral a reaction. We were all so grateful. It was so beautiful. It was so good to be back. Why Vietnam? Again, like falling in love, you know. You described the first woman you ever fell in love. Why did you fall in love? I mean, you can say because she's beautiful, she's funny, she's brilliant, you know, she can, you know, take my 68 Shelby Cobra apart and reconstruct it to factory specs in, you know, 45 minutes. But the fact is that it's none of those things. It's something else. It's maybe pheromonic. It's magic, and it's probably best to not try and figure it out at all.
Finally, I offer you this in an article in the Federalist, written by a woman named Caroline Diagati. She said what ultimately took Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain wasn't mental illness; it was something worse. Let us be intellectually honest about the sorrows of his life, she says. Perhaps then, through a lens of sorrow, we can see the one eternal hope that renders death not proud. She writes that in college, a quote hung on my wall. It was this: "Here I am, this is me, get the hell out of the way." To a nobody from New Jersey who dreamed of bigger things, it was the battle cry of someone who knew his greatest asset was his grit. This kind of person embraced life and was ready to conquer it. That quote was from Anthony Bourdain. She continues, like most fans, I've spent the last few days wondering how a man of such fire and tenacity could die so defeated. I love Bourdain for his zest for life and ability to overcome his demons. His skill at simultaneously getting under someone's skin and into their hearts showed the world what a New Jersey boy is at his best. He lived life so deeply, yet died so hopeless. That shatters me. And me too. And I think that's the thing that I could not help but notice in many of the shows on CNN that he had done in these kind of dark, depressing, dictatored countries that he would go to. As he was sharing a meal with people, he would always ask them about the future, about the hope that they had. And what I ended up reading on his face, Bourdain's face, was a sort of sadness. Some of the shows I actually left feeling maybe a little depressed. Not only that I don't want to go there, but that the people that lived there, even those that were showing signs of optimism, you could see on his face that he didn't really believe there was any hope. And really at the end, I guess that's, not to be overly simplistic, the kind of takeaway, if you will, that I had from his taking his own life, that at some point it was a loss of kind of any hope, in spite of being loved and admired by so many people. I don't think he would even recognize how much of an impact he had on so many people, in spite of having the relationships that he did in his life, in spite of having all the things that people generally look to as being the signs of success. I think at the end, it was the hopelessness of it all that won for him. And so there you have it, my friends. A great loss, a sadness still. And for the rest of us, life goes on. And so with that, I will be back to you next Wednesday for another episode of All You Can Eat. Until then, remember, life is short. So in the meantime, never waste a meal. Thank you.
I'm the Teflon Pan Man. I'm the Teflon Pan Man. Ain't nothing gonna stick on